devastating globalist lies, exposing the mainstream media's propaganda machine, tirelessly waging war on corruption.
All right, I want to calmly now walk through the situation in Egypt, but on the subject of the internet shutdown that began Friday morning Egypt time and has been almost complete. Egypt shut down, worst in internet history, experts report. This out of the AFP. Here's AOL saying internet kill switch, should the United States emulate Egypt? You got to love how they just push incredible tyranny like it's a good thing in our media. And the federal government is setting up a kill switch over the internet. New bill gives Obama kill switch to shut down the internet. That's another headline. Here's another headline out of the Sydney Morning Herald. Obama internet kill switch bill approved. As it moves forward. Here's another one. CNBC host Aaron Burnett implies America should support foreign dictators to keep flow of cheap oil. They always love to sell us that tyranny's good. Here's MSNBC. So how do you shut off a whole nation's internet? MIT experts say it depends on ISP ownership and doubt it could happen in the U.S. unless they pass the Cybersecurity Act, where all the ISPs have a piece of government equipment in their chain by law, and the internet has to be basically redesigned to follow that edict. That's what's in the Cybersecurity Act. That's the internet shut-off switch. That's these giant NSA snooping bases they're building with our taxpayer dollars everywhere. All right, so I'm done talking about that. Let me get into the big news here. As this started throughout the week, I had a lot of listeners calling in saying, oh, I bet it's George Soros. I bet it's our government overthrowing another country. Because the CIA admits they've overthrown well over 100 countries in the last 65 years since they've been around. And before that, the OSS. And a lot of times they do it to democracies, they do it to tyrannies, they do it to dictatorships, they do it to leftist regimes, right-wing regimes. If the dictator doesn't just basically sign their entire country over to the globalist, doesn't accept their entire agenda, then they're overthrown. And a lot of times, even though they serve them, they're overthrown. Saddam Hussein put into power in the early 1970s. The U.S. government basically funded the Iraqi government to make him the head of Ba'athist security. He then overthrew the Ba'athists in 79, became the full dictator. U.S. government gave him over $30 billion on record and said, go ahead and attack Iran. The CIA was there as advisors on the ground. U.S. satellite images were given to him. And then he said, I'm going to invade Kuwait. They're stealing my oil. In 1990, and April Gillespie, the U.S. ambassador, said, go ahead. We're not going to get involved. Just like they basically wink-winked for him with Iran. Then they basically invaded, wrecked the country, put it under sanctions. Over 1 million Iraqis died. Then they invaded again in 2003, lied about WMDs. I mean, this is the history of what happened. And it's declassified that Saddam Hussein in 1948 was hired by the CIA for 2 years trained in Cairo, Egypt, on how to commit assassinations, and then later, of course, brought to power by our government. But this is not our government. This is the private intelligence agency of the big private central banks represented by the Davos, Switzerland group, the Bilderberg group. These are the major meeting houses and confabs where they openly want world government run by private corporate interest that remove your Bill of Rights, your Constitution, your sovereignty. And then bring in a paramilitary police state grid so they can carry out their policies against you. Now, Hosni Mubarek in power for 30 years, a dictator for 29, but really in power technically for 31. He gets $13 billion plus every year of U.S. taxpayer money. A lot of the U.S. torture centers are there, the ghost sites, the black sites. He's been the angel of Israel, the angel of the United States. He's done everything they want, brutally murdering people, torturing, pure death, just absolutely barbarous to the huge population of Egypt. Then you've got the Arab Brotherhood, going back to British intelligence, and then after they lost control of the Middle East during World War II under Hitler, and then under CIA control after that. This is not even my opinion. I mean, you know, we reserved judgment until Friday night on this, but we did have guests on who said this could be the case. where they're flushing another one of their minions down the toilet. Hosni Mubarek, to put out and to put into power Mohammed el-Baradei, who they admit is a United Nations George Soros minion, who's the former head of the IAEA at the UN, the Nuclear Weapons Regulatory Group. And I've got the whole breakdown on him. Director General, International Atomic Energy Agency, New York Law School, CIA trained. I mean, his whole background is public. And he shows back up the week before all this starts in Egypt and starts going around saying, I'm ready to be your leader. And it turns out the Egyptian military is bought and paid for by the U.S. and Israel. This is on record. And is basically standing down, unless they try to burn some of the museums, are standing down while the people run around and loot. And here's the London Telegraph. Egypt protest. America's secret backing for rebel leaders behind uprising. Continues. Egyptian opposition leader calls on Mubarak to leave today. And who is that? This is the new puppet, the UN puppet. Because there's one thing Mubarak hadn't done. He refuses to force sterilize people, and they've had UN population summits. He's been criticized. He refuses to sterilize and bring an abortion. Now, you better believe that el-Baradei will. So Mubarak loves to torture, kill, slaughter, total dictator. Our government's got its torture sites there, loves him, but he isn't good enough. He isn't good enough. He doesn't hate his people enough. And so Mohammed el-Baradei, the Pied Piper of Egyptian revolt, Paul Joseph Watson, that's from Friday, his report up there. And, of course, on Friday he also reported on the George Soros connection. But now Axelrod's bragging that el-Baradei is their man. We've got another report by the LRC blog, Egypt's Rose Revolution, similar to what happened in Georgia. There's another report here. Egypt is another Soros color revolution. Soros, of course, funded rebellions and takeovers all over Eastern Europe and into Central Asia on the belly of Russia. And it's just hard to believe until you look at the evidence and that it's just admitted that our government is so illegitimate. But you can learn a lot from what's happened with this situation. And you can see what's going to happen here in the U.S. Remember, a few years ago, I told you that Google is an NSA front. That's now been mainstream news in the Associated Press in the last few weeks, that it basically is the NSA. It's not part of it. It is the NSA. It is NSA software, keyword software. That's how they listen to your phones and read your faxes and your email is a keyword search. They grab all the data of the, quote, internet, but your private faxes, emails, phone calls are recorded, put in a database, and then they run a Google search on it. It's called Echelon. Been around for 30 years at least. That's what Google is. But it's worse. In fact, I'll print this during the break and go back over it. Google admits they can now predict the future to a great extent. So they know when there's about to be a real rebellion in Egypt, they just activate their takeover, see? That way they can ride the wave. That's what's hard to beat about the New World Order. They've got artificial intelligence. I want to lay out the geopolitical strategy of the globalists and their social engineers very simply, because I usually spend my time getting into fine nuances of it, but to give you a general summation. The private global banking cartel has conservatively created 1.5 quadrillion in derivatives. It is a debt black hole, hundreds of times bigger than all the real wealth in the world. Even the Washington Post admits this. They buy off your governments with the made-up fiat currency. They need police state systems in place to make sure that the population never gets control of their nation again. Their political creation is the UN that poses as a humanitarian organization, but in its own annals admits it is a eugenics population reduction program designed to keep the third world from developing. Because if the third world ever developed and developed sophisticated weapon systems, technological systems, they would be sophisticated enough not to be overtaken by the globalist and kept in debt, servitude, and bondage. Now, separately, and you see this in the news all the time, the post-industrial world, getting rid of our industrial base, getting back to nature. The stated goal of the UN, Club of Rome, Council on Foreign Relations, is to deindustrialize the West and to destroy the middle class. The ultra-rich call this the final revolution. They don't want you doing financially well. They don't want you being self-sufficient. This is the stated enemy. They want you controlled, working for a Fortune 100 corporation at near the poverty line, so that you're so busy just trying to survive, you can never challenge the monopoly of power of the world's ruling class. There is a continuity of agenda from Australia to the United States, from Chile to Canada, from Japan to South Africa. The same programs, the same international organizations, the same standardization. And when you get into the white papers of these people, they openly say we're going to have a Singaporean model globally. And they go on to admit the communist Chinese model is a Singaporean model. And if you want to know what life is going to be like, and I've made a big deal out of this because I happened to pick up a year-old copy a month or two ago of December 2010, January 2010, National Geographic. And it said right there, Singapore is great, tyranny's great, this is what our government wants to do. Their population is at a 1.2 replacement rate. That means they're dying. For every 2 adults, they have 1.2 children. They have no free speech. They're totally enslaved. And the article says this is the model to go with. So they're just out in the open pushing this. Now, what does that have to do with Egypt? The globalists put Hosni Mubarek in. For 30 years, he's ruled with an iron fist. The majority of the U.S.-run black site torture centers, where they even take U.S. citizens to have their teeth ripped out, to be put on the rack, to have their heart stopped with drugs, to have their kids raped in front of them. That's in the Army's own reports, the General Tagumba report. I mean, you talk about hell on earth, building the army of darkness. Our government, which isn't our government, it's a hijacker. It's the corporate, globalist, social Darwin hijacker. The eugenicist hijackers have turned Egypt into a fortress of pure evil. Now, continuing, they are able, with their actuaries, with their computer systems. In fact, Jaron, did I print that article about Google being able to predict the future now? Oh, it's right in front of me. It'd bite me if it was a snake. When I talked earlier before the break about globalist modeling and globalist operations, what they're doing is a 21st century mode of what the British Great Game was. If you don't know what the British Great Game is, you can just look it up in an encyclopedia. Basically, the British would play different powers off against each other. They would divide and conquer. How this little bitty island with a small population dominate more than half the known world, to where the sun never set on the British Empire. And they're taking that system and using NSA predictive systems where when they track enough cell phone users, enough internet users, enough of your daily habits, they know how to predict what you're going to do individually every day by tracking your iPhone or your Droid, and they have those in Egypt, at about 99% accuracy. The government knows who you're going to call next with 93% accuracy. This is their admissions, because they see patterns in what you do that you don't consciously see. You know, a lot of people, when they join a government agency or something, are given these thousands of questions, psychological exams, trying to find out really, truly who you are or if you're deceptive. Well, imagine what they know off what you watch on TiVo, tracking what you watch, when you flip the channel, what you surf on the internet, where you go, what you do, where you pull in and eat, what you Google, what you Yahoo. And so it's now admitted Google is NSA snooping software given to the public, and we think we're going into Google to find information out. But it's like, to use a analogy from Lord of the Rings, when you're looking into a crystal, it can look both ways. Sauron can look right back out at you. You understand? In fact, he is looking right back out at you and wants to know what you want to look at, wants to look into your mind. But this isn't a crystal ball in a fictitious, sword and sorcerer fantasy. This is real. And over a decade ago, I warned you about this because I was reading MIT magazine that's public. I was studying this as they were laughing about it, laughing at us, the profane slaves, laughing at how we won't even be needed in the future as soon as they get the robotic system in place. See, human life has always been cheap. Now it's worthless. Now it's worse than worthless. It's garbage. It has to be gotten rid of. It has to be carried out. Now, here's the headline, Steve Watson, but then it links through to Reuters, Associated Press. Google and CIA plow millions into huge recorded future monitoring project. And it goes on to say that the CIA and Google are investing jointly in a company started with Pentagon money that predicts the future with near certainty. This is just them coming out and telling you what they're already doing. Now, that said, what does this have to do with Egypt? Hosni Mubarek, 30 years torturing, murdering, slaughtering, our government saying how great he is. Why do you think the government came out on Thursday and Friday and said they were backing Hosni Mubarek? They later bragged because they like people to know what they're doing who are thinkers. So everything's hidden in plain view. They'll have a general propaganda, but then they'll have the admission in plain view. They admitted in the Wall Street Journal and Reuters, those articles are up on Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com, that, the State Department is financing this whole thing. It's all admitted. And they are going to put in Mohammed el-Baradi, who is UN, who is CIA. And we found that if we backed Mubarak publicly, that would make his people become even more enraged and attacking. See that cold-blooded manipulation? So they're flushing their little darling murderer down the toilet right now. Their new UN puppet, who will shoot them up with the vaccines and call for abortion, Dr. Mohammed el-Baradi, he's demanding that Hosni Mubarak resign. I'm going to come back and go through the rest of this and how it ties in. When billions of us are pouring what movies we like, what words we're looking up, what sex we're into, what type of food we're into, what type of vacations we're into, where we're going, what church we go to, what choices we make when we're watching digital cable, all of that is tracked and is two-way. That's admitted. They get a clear image of who we are and have computers that analyze what our real worldview is, what our real psyche, our soul. It's a computer literally reading our soul, who we are. This isn't some con artist fortune teller looking at your palm. This is computers that have had data systems loaded into them by sociologists, psychologists, anthropologists in psychological warfare testing their propaganda. They admit they test propaganda on the news and then see what effect it has in cyberspace. But now they're moving towards phasing out the free web and bringing in this draconian web. And so why would they overthrow Hosni Mubarak, who's done everything this global corporate crime syndicate has told him to do? Why would they go in there and finance and then brag about it? I mean, it's in the Wall Street Journal, the London Telegraph, BBC, AP, Reuters, Newsweek, that this guy that they're trying to get into power, this el-Baradi, the former head of the UN Atomic Energy Agency, this top globalist, is the guy who they put back into Egypt. I mean, he doesn't walk like an Egyptian. He doesn't live there. He didn't go to school there. He is purely an outsider. So he talks the talk of revolution. He doesn't walk the walk. And so the globalists are able to gauge that Egypt was going into revolution. And now the media even admits this. The State Department and the CIA analyzed what was happening in Egypt in the last 3 years and knew that there would soon be a rebellion. And so they began to position Mohammed el-Baradi to take over. I mean, they're just saying it. So see, the rebellion is real against Hosni Mubarek. He is a tyrant. He is wrong. He is out of control. They do deserve freedom, but they're not going to get it from Dr. Mohammed el-Baradi, who is a globalist through and through, and it turns out funded by the UN, going to Davos, hanging out with George Soros, getting support from these people. So when they know there's going to be a rebellion, when they know Egypt's demanding liberty, when their people are so incredibly enslaved and kept impoverished as a political tool, that's part of the policy there, right at the wave, there is a tide in the affairs of men when taken at the flood leads on to fortune. So Shakespeare's Julius Caesar states. They know that flood, that tide has come in to launch their new ship, so they put in this guy. And now the Muslim Brotherhood, you talk about Muslim extremists, you talk about British and Israeli intelligence, that's not even denied. Now they admit, this is Associated Press, Jordan's opposition, Arabs will topple tyrants, Hamam Saeed, and others. We've got all these articles up on InfoWars and Prison Planet where it's admitted that the Muslim Brotherhood, these are the guys that worked with Hitler in World War II, and before that with the British intelligence, that they are trying to topple Jordan, who literally licks the boots of Israel, Egypt, who sucks the boots of Israel and the U.S., and Saudi Arabia, that literally licks the bottom of the boots. And now that's why the king of Saudi Arabia is freaking out, because the Arab Brotherhood's about to try to overthrow them. And here's what's hardcore. If you think they're going to put on rock and roll music and tell the women to go to college and all the rest of it and put Playboy on the shelves, that was all there under Saddam Hussein. That was an older Eisenhower policy of putting, you know, what was seen as a liberal Western government in. That changed by the 60s, by the mid-60s. They said, we're going to put radical Muslims in. Even as the Washington Post reported a decade ago, 500+ million total. In 1 year alone, over $60 million. But it's a global program to radicalize Muslims, sending them textbooks about how to kill Americans and funding radical Muslim leaders. Who did they use to throw over Mohammed Mossadegh in 1953? CIA declassified, Operation Ajax. They blew up mosque, machine gun crowds, put out flyers saying Mohammed Mossadegh had done it, who was a secular poet, but didn't want to give all the oil money to the British and U.S. oil companies. That's declassified. Our government staged terror attacks, blamed it on him, and then used radical Muslims to overthrow him, then put the Shah in, the little princeling, over him. Then they got tired of him. We're looking at using Muslim extremists again, but that got out of their control, the evidence shows, hence the Islamic Revolution. And that's what's dangerous about this witch's brew. You look at Saddam Hussein, 2003, caught a few years later. The women are back wearing the headdresses. There's no Playboy on the shelves. I'm not saying that's a good thing overall. The point is, there's not 60% college graduates anymore. They want Muslim extremists. They want dirt floors. They want starvation. That is the British Ministry of Defense 1949 Global Population Report. That is the State Department Memorandum 200, written by Henry Kissinger. It was declassified in 92. Go read it. It's several hundred pages. How they would fund turmoil and death and destruction, and that if a dictator wouldn't sterilize his people and wouldn't fully follow the globalist plan, get rid of them. And that's what they're trying to do with Hosni Mubarek. They are going to put in another globalist after him, knowing after 30 years they're going to change the name on the building of Tyranny Incorporated, but they're going to put a new puppet in. And that's what you got to know about America. 9% approval rating for Congress in Gallup. Both parties in deep trouble. The people know offshore banks have looted tens of trillions, won't tell Congress where the money went. The Republicans are trying to co-opt the Tea Party. They're trying to make it a left-right issue where, well, if you complain about the government, you must be a conservative. That way Democrats automatically support the tyranny when they own both parties. But as we go into this tumult, as we go into this police state, they are going to put forward fake opposition. And if the globalists look at the rebellion actuaries, if they look at the different data they've got, and it tells them with almost 100% certainty what's going to happen, they will instantly stage the riots themselves. They will pay police, as they got caught in Greece, as they've been caught in Canada and the U.S. And by the way, that's on Al Jazeera. That's on MSNBC. That's in a bunch of the other newspapers. Eyewitnesses say state-sponsoring vandalism. Is the Egyptian government using agent provocateurs to justify and crack down on the protesters? We know they had the police stand down, the military standing down. We know that they're having hired police and other thugs, this is confirmed, go in and burn down shops and go into people's homes and burn them so that the public will then beg for the rebellion to end. They're getting that lined up. It's all about timing, so that right as one of the globalist new puppets, whether it's El Baradi or others, because sometimes it takes 2 or 3 puppets within a week or two to go through before people finally settle down. They've got other puppets like shark teeth lined up to slide into place. This is an art form. This is very sophisticated chess going on. And so the New World Order knew that Egypt was on the verge of rebellion. They know that. They know Saudi Arabia is. They know that other nations like Yemen, Tunisia, already overthrown. They know that's happening. And so they've got their fake opposition lined up and ready. Then they, with the WikiLeaks and the Twitter, which is now admitted, trigger this against their own ally, because there is no honor among thieves, Hosni Mubarek, and are now bringing in this false revolution to not end the tyranny and give the Egyptians liberty they thirst for, but to give them a new flavor of tyranny. Oh, you don't like the grape-flavored cyanide Kool-Aid? How about cherry-flavored? How about lime-flavored? You don't like that? How about coconut-flavored? You don't like that? How about apple-flavored? That's all this is manufactured society through the NSA, data mining, future predictive programming lensing. There's an Infowars.com story breaking all this down. CFR's Foreign Affairs on Egypt's hero. And it goes over the strange case of Dr. Mohammed al-Baradei, who, again, is admittedly the former head of the UN's Atomic Energy Agency, admitted hooked in with George Soros and the CIA. Here's the London Telegraph. Egypt protest America's secret backing for rebel leaders behind uprising, because they knew that the tree was putting on the fruit. The apples of rebellion became ripe, and right as the apple fell, there is the State Department, there is the Pentagon, with their hand out, catching the apple before it even hits the ground. And then I looked into the other opposition leaders, both in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Yemen, in Saudi Arabia, in Jordan. And you look at it, in all the cases, 1, 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 deep. The number 1, the number 2, the number 3, the number 4, the number 5, opposition. The flavors of the rainbow are all Western funded and ready to go in, which makes perfect sense for these Western powers, because they want to make sure if there is a rebellion that no matter what happens, they own the horses who are in the race. But sometimes things don't go the way they want. But the larger issue here is, what does this say about the interests that run our country? In every case, they want dictatorship. In every case, they want tyranny, because the ruling class, the ruling political class that owns all the major political parties in the Western world, they understand how to control revolution. They understand how by controlling the full spectrum of choices, no matter what you do, they're always back in control. Only by becoming aware of these larger geopolitical stratagems can we have any hope as a society as reversing this. And on top of that, and even more importantly, if you look at who funds and finances and controls every one of these large global institutions that has huge stables of fake rebel leaders ready to take power at any time, you understand that they also use those rebel leaders as a system to menace their puppet government and ensure that they are tenuous or unstable, and understand how insecure they are. But for us, if you look at who funds all those organizations, it is the global private banking cartel that is able to issue thousands upon thousands of trillions in fake, false fiat currency. And by issuing that fiat currency, which then has value because of our faith in it, these private central banks inherit the whole world for nothing. It's a giant hat trick. It's a giant scam. And as Thomas Jefferson said, if we ever allow private banks to control the issuance of currency and credit, our progeny will wake up homeless on the continent their forefathers conquered. And that's what's happening. The private central banks, the Bank of London, the Bank of England, the private Federal Reserve here in the United States, the Bundesbank in Germany, they are all private shareholders in the IMF, in the World Bank, in the International Bank of Settlements, in the OECD, and they write the global rules. They have the endless money backed up by taxpayers to go out and make loans to countries worldwide, and the same havoc that they have poured out upon the third world, they are now visiting upon us. And it's not just my opinion. In 2002, Greg Palast of the BBC got leaked the secret documents when Joseph Stiglitz left, confirming they were planning it here.